very, very, very English. Right?
It's very English. I find this woman's work, well, two films in particular, just so incredibly well observed and just so like juicily interesting to watch.
Yeah.
And they speak to me so much, but I think it's because it is my world.
Sure.
And potentially Mexico is not quite the same as repressed.
Yeah, we can talk about the differences between the cultures, but yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
well, tell me about this. So repressions don't really...
No, there's certainly repression,
Mm-hmm.
but it's different. It's like, in Mexico is like, if you have an issue with somebody, they'll tell you off pretty quickly and exactly what they're feeling. And, there's not, emotions is not what is repressed.
Well, this is an interesting thing because we've talked a lot about the idea of, well, often we think that a way, or in the past, a way to overcome capitalism is just to get over repressions, like sexual repressions. But actually, that's just one form of repression. And we have repressions everywhere.
Yeah.
Psychic repressions, we repress ourselves. And yeah, the repressions on display very obviously in this film or these films are just one form of repression.
Sure.
And potentially that form of repression allows for less repression elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's not something that we can escape or overcome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would say maybe the difference is that, I mean, at least from my experience in Mexico, is like you'll have people that will tell you off fairly easily. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily that type of communication that is repressed, but the motives are. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you'll eventually just come to terms with the fact that maybe, what you're angry about is because of something else or whatever. I mean, it's like pretty common, but that there is that distinction of like, I think people don't really have an issue with just getting up in your face and saying, what.
But actually, the repression is kind of like a degree deeper.
Exactly.
I know it's funny. There's a very well observed Twitter feed called Very British Problems, I think, and it kind of you get a gist of what the form of cultural repression is in England. This kind of politeness, but once you kind of get the system or like the dictionary definitions, this Twitter feed kind of says when one says best at the end of an email, that means like absolutely fuck you.
Yeah.
When you sign off an email, you're like kind regards, and it's like I hate you so much. So,
sent by iPhone. Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. But when you understand it, it's not. You can really easily like dictionarily define what's being said or not being said. So English people find things really obvious. It's coming to America. It's not quite understood in a way. So should I give a brief rundown about the film or films in question?
Yeah.
So technically, well, this episode is about a film called Archipelago by Joanna Hogg, but I will mention another film that she made a few years earlier than Archipelago called Unrelated. And the reason why I lump them together is they're structurally very similar. They're set in similar worlds, similar quote unquote types of people, similar theory at play, similar repressions in action. So Archipelago is about a kind of very, we would call it, I guess, upper middle class in the UK, kind of posh family, old money family maybe.
Inheritance, yeah.
Yeah, in the UK, this kind of typical posh family. Who are going on holiday as this kind of farewell holiday for the son of the family. The two children are kind of grown up, and they're revisiting a house in the Isles of Scilly that they used to visit as children, their family holidays. They are going to have this kind of painting holiday, and the father is meant to join them at some stage, but he never arrives. It's this kind of presence, absence presence of the father perpetually phoning up the house, and the mother of the family kind of asking when is he going to turn up, and he never does. The son of the family, he has kind of a corporate job, I think it's in banking, and he is in his late 20s, and he's decided that he must go to Africa to work with AIDS victims. So he's at this kind of crisis point, quarter-life crisis, disillusionment, and he is a vegetarian.
Do you think he feels shame because of the inheritance?
Potentially.
I mean, he wants to go to Africa. He feels bad for the cook.
Well, yeah, there's a kind of weird interaction between this character played by Tom Hiddleston, and they hire a cook for the week, and he can't bear to see the cook working when they're not, so he tries to help her tidy up the kitchen, and she kind of gets frustrated because she says, well, what do I do? He is always making small talk with her. You can't really tell if he's flirting or just trying to be nice. Yeah. There's this awkward scene where she's cooking lobster for the family, and he is a vegetarian. Is very inquisitive about how these lobsters are getting cooked and how painful it will be for the lobsters. There's lots of cultural references, like the cook does a cookery course at Ballymaloe, which is this very typical English people from that background will go on a gap year to learn how to cook, and they might do a cookery course at this twee place in Ireland called Ballymaloe. It's a very good cookery school, but it's funny. It's just kind of this world that I really know.
Well, you came from a similar background as the director. She's also the writer?
Yeah, the writer-director. So interestingly, she's, I assume from this background, just because it's just so well observed, and her first feature film, Unrelated, is just unbelievably incredible. Very similar. It's about a group of families from that background who go on holiday to Italy, rent a villa together, and a woman who is unhappily married, who's supposed to be joining her boarding school friend. She's probably in her late 40s, early 50s at this stage, on holiday with her family and other families, and she arrives on her own because her husband and her are having kind of difficulties, and she ends up getting involved with the younger children in the family, and believes that there might be something with this kind of cool boarding school kid from the UK. It's also played by Tom Hiddleston. It's this very awkward misunderstandings and the explosions of eventually unrepressed angers that happen in this holiday home in Italy are just exactly the same as in Archipelago. Yeah. So they're very structurally similar. Yeah. But should we talk a bit about how she films and why maybe you were put off by this film when we were watching? You were like, "Oh, this is so boring."
Well, you made it make a little bit more sense to me when you said that it's a very sort of unattached camera work. I wouldn't know even if to call it work, because it's just almost like a tripod. There's no panning. Obviously, the camera doesn't move. But you mentioned that it was something sort of like a fly on the wall.
Yeah,
so you're just
absolutely
looking into this sort of like interaction between the family, but maybe there's a difference in like should an entertaining story or at least a pop entertaining story, can it be repressed? Because this one's obviously repressed, and precisely because of that repression, where they're not communicating their frustrations with each other. They're just kind of like beating around the bush when it comes to like what they really want to say. That can be kind of like mind-numbingly just like frustrating. I was like, nothing's really going on. I mean, obviously there's a payoff at the end.
Yeah, but, it's funny. Well, I think there's two different types of story. There's popular narrative, kind of goal-orientated, forward-moving narrative, and this is slightly different. But there is a narrative structure to it. Yeah. It's interesting. I just want to pick up what you use the term "beat around the bush."
Oh yeah.
There is a scene where they go pheasants are shot, and there are beaters beating in a bush. So it's really funny. And then also there's a scene, you were saying it's interesting. There's a scene where this very angry older sister who's very angry with her brother, who's throwing everything away, and she's very conventional. And how dare everybody else has to work, and why isn't he working, and why is he throwing away his future? She bites on a bullet in a pheasant. Anyway, we can talk about the kind of like metaphors there. But anyway, these. It's been a long time since I looked into her technique, but I believe what she does is she doesn't really have a script. She has a loose treatment written before the filming takes place. She goes with actors for a number of months to a place, a house. She and the actors improvise over a number of weeks the scenes based on given motivations, and a camera is just plonked and observes.
Yeah.
So it's very real in a way that other films that we're going to look at, for example, Blade Runner 2049, are not real.
There's also a lot of like, the frame is set up in a way that people leave the frame for a long time, relatively long time, that there's nothing going on and you can only hear people talking from another room. I thought that was kind of interesting. This reminded me actually of, I don't know if you saw it, Roma.
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
Cuarón's
I did.
movie. I thought there was this very interesting shot where the camera is like in a single place, but it's panning.
He does that in a lot of his films, like Children of Men. Yeah, this kind of shots in which the camera kind of pans and looks at the world. Yeah, kind of, and it's interesting in Roma because like obviously she's a small figure in this grand kind of cultural narrative. Yeah,
I think what I was trying to say is like the panning has like this sort of like this pace to it that I think it's part of like the middle class family or the upper middle class family that I forgot her name, but the one that works with them, the cleaning lady, and it has like the camera has this pace. And she's barely within the film, the frame.
Are you talking about Roma or the...
Roma.
Yeah.
So the camera is like moving and she barely reaches to like be in the frame. Like she's cleaning some stuff, turning lights off, and then like she's almost right out of the frame.
Yeah.
But this movie doesn't even have a pace. Like
it's very... It's because
the camera doesn't have a pace. Like
they're there on a painting holiday and the texture of the shots is very painterly, but it's digital. Like I feel like it's 29 frames.
The frame rate is weird. Yeah,
it's very kind of like, well, she used to be a TV director and it has that kind of TV digital look. But
it looks kind of soap opera-ish.
Well, that's another thing that's quite interesting. She used to be a soap director. She did things like these kind of very basic soaps like London's Burning and EastEnders and stuff. So she brings this kind of kitchen sink drama to a different segment of society. But the activity that the family does when they're on holiday is this painting. They're very painty. They're very kind of set up like a landscape shots. It's overwhelming environment with these kind of insignificant figures in and out of the frame.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me that you're saying that Martin Scorsese financed or like he kind of
her latest film, I believe, after watching Archipelago. Yeah. It's
like almost the complete opposite of what Scorsese does.
Yeah, I know. Wow. So I know Martin Scorsese, so his films feel like there's so much footage that it's like so overly edited down. Like it's like bam, 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 bam. Yeah.
The camera is almost like a character because it moves very quickly and everything. And this one doesn't move at all. I don't think I saw.
There's occasional cuts where they obviously did like a wide shot and some other shot, but it's kind of rare. Yeah. It's mostly just one static camera.
But do you think that in this movie, like the camera is repressed? It's repressing from following the subjects.
Yeah, there's kind of an impotence.
Yeah,
definitely. And there's kind of this inability to communicate between the family, kind of emptiness between the relationships within the family. It's very stale.
And the father never
turns up. Yeah. But the interesting thing with these films is that at a certain point, 3/4 of the way through both of them, there are these utter emotional outbursts. In Unrelated, the father of the character played by Tom Hiddleston, who plays this very arrogant, in the UK we say public school, but public school means private school in the UK. So it's very arrogant private school kid, prep school kid, who has gotten high and damaged a car that was being borrowed by the family, and he's drinking wine that doesn't belong to him. He's just basically an asshole. And off screen, his father has this enormous explosion of anger. You just hear this shouted argument. All the other characters are sitting by the pool in the foreground, just kind of looking embarrassed.
Yep.
And the same happens in Archipelago. Off screen upstairs, this absolute angry outburst by the sister after various unsaid things reach a boiling point.
Yeah.
And there's no resolution at the end other than they kind of get on and they accept the way things are and they go back to...
Yeah. What do you think that what do you think is the meaning of like does it have anything to do with the level of repression that is in the family, the fact that the father isn't there? If you're expecting, if you're expecting sort of like the father to come back, maybe a lot of problems stay unresolved.
Well, it's interesting because what is resolution?
No, I mean, I'm not saying resolution in like a real sense, but the hope of resolution.
Well, it is interesting because obviously they hope that this father's going to turn up. So no argument has been had that gives them insight that he's not going to turn up.
Yeah.
So there is hope. There hasn't been previously some kind of expression of the fact that he's not happy and he's not turning up. It's just not turning up.
Did you ever see Crimson Peak?
I never saw it, no.
Okay, well, there's a ghost in the story and everything that it's like, kind of scary and everything. But Guillermo del Toro was saying that the real villain of the story is the absence of the parents. So like the parents never come up in the movie. And that's what's sort of causing discord within the brother and sister. And obviously there's some other deeper stuff there that I won't get into. But I wonder if like the absence of the father creates this delegation of problems that might be resolved, but they're not because they're delegated to the father that is obviously never going to show up.
So he's kind of the scapegoat of the issues. There's this hope that he's going to turn up. And when they it's interesting because the great explosions that happen are kind of based on something completely pointless. So in the older sister in Archipelago, they have pheasant cooked for dinner one night by the cook Rose, and she bites on a bit of shot, which is like the bullet that kills the bird. And no one is very sympathetic towards her. They were like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh dear." And that causes her to have this utter outburst.
Yeah.
And it's kind of displaced, absolutely displaced. The other thing I was going to say is that perhaps, the discord is the unsaid and the lack of presence.
Yeah. Which is easily that's very easily delegated to some absence. In this case, like the father. Through that absence, like I think that the resolution of maybe feeling like someone's taking care of you or someone's like watching over whatever happens to you, like in this case, like biting the bullet. She was hoping that maybe
there was someone who was going to be on her side absolutely. I mean, should we talk a bit about how repression functions and why it's fascinating and why it's not necessarily a bad thing? I don't know. This is a form of drama that revolves around the unsaid. But I guess it's interesting. You watch something like EastEnders. Do you know anything? When I say EastEnders, do you know what it is?
No.
So in the UK, and actually this director was a working TV director who directed EastEnders. It's set in a very working class community in East London. It's kind of this really long running soap opera in the UK, and it's very over emotional, very full of outbursts, shouting matches, people in great conflict with each other. And it's just interesting, these two oppositional parts of society in the UK. You have a kind of a soap opera about unrepressed. There's this kind of stereotype of the working class and more earthy and unrepressed, and then this posh family, it's all repression, but it's just different ways of dealing with being human.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe, I mean, this will be interesting to know about the way that she writes. Do you think that maybe she has a script?
Oh, she doesn't have a script.
She doesn't have a script?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's all about the unsaid,
Because I was wondering, it would be interesting to like have a script, maybe a very generous script, excessive, like very long, and then ask the actors or the actresses, like, repress some of the lines. If you feel like maybe you shouldn't say this and it feels kind of weird, like, don't say it. So you have like this sort of like incomplete delivery of the script.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, about script. What is a script? As in, what counts for things being said? So obviously a lot of acting, the majority is in the unsaid. And you can totally delete things with and replace them with just like a look or something. But it's interesting that I feel like she doesn't use a script potentially because it's all about yeah, I mean, words are about being said, and so not having a script is it's all the unsaid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm kind of like, I'm very interested in this because what is the function of repression when it comes to relationships with family? And also, what is the outcome of releasing that repression? We've talked a little bit about how Christopher Nolan says that working with his family.
Yeah, I know. Allows him, because making films is like this incredibly stressful.
Yeah, he says like it's the best thing that could have ever happened to him,
honest.
because you're honest and you say whatever you want. But it's obviously a very different dynamic.
Yeah.
That you don't repress what you want to say and you're very honest with each other. But it stings more because you're expecting repression from your family.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because I am this kind of from that background, but my family's very unrepressed, and we just completely say to each other what we want to say, perhaps too honest.
So it's my family, but obviously for the family in Archipelago, it was complete opposite of that.
Complete opposite. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the other thing about repression, obviously there are different kinds of repression. We've talked about in previous episodes the idea of primary repression causing language, and we are because of repression. We would not be able to create anything without repression, and how almost as an artist, all you're doing is turning your personal repressions into some kind of beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Look at like Woody Allen. He manages to just like transform his own personal neurosis into a whole Earth. So yeah, I mean, there's something beautiful about this kind of awkward dance between these characters.
Yeah.
How they have to negotiate and interact with each other without ever saying anything. And we don't even know really why they're arguing. The dad isn't there, okay, so that's some underlying thing that perhaps is generating a lot of tension, but there's never anything said about really why the older sister's that annoyed with the youngest, with the brother, other than, oh, he's throwing away his future. There's kind of fragmented irritations. Yeah. And it all comes out in something that's nothing to do with anything, just biting on a bit of shot and being kind of pissed off that no one is that interested in it.
Yeah. And it's also interesting that maybe the underside of repression is sublimation into some form of work or some form of art or something, and they're going to this island. I'm not sure if it's an island or something, but with an art instructor. Yeah. So they're not saying anything to each other that is meant to be said, but they're painting.
It's interesting because the mother is into kind of drawing as a hobby, and the artist asks her, "What does your husband think of your interest in art? Does he like it?" And her response is really interesting. She kind of says, "Oh, I think he maybe likes it because I do it." It's just this really roundabout response, but almost perhaps she's
beating around the bush. Yeah.
Beating around. I know, it's interesting. The whole film is like beating around the bush. There's a whole scene where beaters are the guys who go out and make noises and evoke pheasants to like fly up to be able to be shot by the people who are shooting. So the whole thing is beating about the bush, but it's interesting because we talked about forward-moving narrative in other podcasts and how narrative works, and we'll talk about it a bit more. But this film is all about, it's like an inverse narrative where it's all about nothing. The other kind of massive explosion that happens in I say massive, it's all very muted, explosion that happens in Archipelago is they go out for lunch to a restaurant, and they're the only clients there. It's a very barren, empty place, and there's a whole dance around where should we sit or who should sit where, which table should we go to. But the older sister orders guinea fowl, and the guinea fowl comes pink, and she thinks it's undercooked, and she asks to see the cook, and she kind of complains and very withdrawn way of complaining and asks for soup instead, and the older brother doesn't say anything but just stands up and leaves.
Yeah. Do you think that, so you're saying that, the end of this film is sort of like a return to what it was in the beginning. So it's almost kind of like tragedy.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like tragedy is lost potential. So within a story, you have potential for some other world being set up, and then that potential is withdrawn in the end. So something like A Star is Born, you have this great potential of the relationship, and then that whole future is taken away by the act of suicide. So I wouldn't say it's tragedy. I'd just say it's like what's the word?
I just mean tragedy in the sense that like there's a journey, but the end point is the same as the starting point.
I think that could be quite good. I think it's a word that I want to use beginning with C. That expresses it. Oh God, it's on the tip of my tongue. Consolation.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of fine, you know.
Yeah, there's like something comforting about it.
There's something comforting, yeah.
That nothing
needs to change. It's fine.
Nothing has to change.
Yeah, it's fine.
Do you like, for example, the end of, say, like, I don't know, There Will Be Blood, where it's just like it completely leaves you hanging?
Yeah.
It doesn't have some kind of resolution. There's no closure. Things kind of continue on going the same. Same could be said maybe of like movies where the villain wins. What do you think about like movies that end like that?
I don't really have an opinion about any kind of ending. I think any kind of ending is fine. You know, obviously we've talked about films that are within ideology and films that like elucidate ideology. And maybe there's a difference there in terms of what is more quote unquote useful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's fine to have like escape and a crutch and like a fantasy that things can turn out good in some instances and sometimes not, you know. But I mean, I think, you know, if we were to talk about like film as some kind of medicinal thing that we have to take to correct ourselves and to have some kind of message, I think, like no change is probably, but I don't think like storytelling is necessarily for that, you know.
Yeah, we've talked in a couple of previous episodes about repression being sort of like what creates our reality. Repressing something is what constructs how we experience the world.
Exactly.
Do you think that maybe in this case in Archipelago, the construction of that repression is valid, or maybe not valid because there's, I guess, not like a valid construction anyway. But I don't know. It does seem kind of like tragic to me for some reason. Yeah.
I feel like, you know, British repression is so generative. You have like literally the best comedy, I think, in the world because which comes out of these people. You know, it's kind of, I guess, tragic figures potentially. We talk a lot about Peep Show. Have you seen Peep Show? You've seen an episode of Peep Show. One of the main characters, Mark, and the comedy comes from his inner world versus his outer world. His inability to address his kind of desires. His inner world says what he wants, and he can never enact it. It provides humour for a lot of people, and Britain has generated a lot of things, lots of creation. I feel like, you know, a whole strata of people from the UK are sent to certain schools at a certain age. I went to boarding school at 7, and these schools basically teach you how to sublimate, how to repress, to push all kind of those aspects of yourself into creation, into achievement, which is not good, but it's not good. You know, I was really resentful of going to boarding school for 10 years, for so many years of my life, and I think I came to a point where I was, you know, it's just a way of being in the world.
So particularly I think for people that are trying to sublimate, a lot of people misunderstand, or they think that what's getting in the way of them being able to create something is that they haven't seen the world enough, or they haven't said enough, or they haven't like really gone deep into understanding themselves in some way that confronts repression. Do you think then that maybe there should be an underside to that says like it's okay that, in fact, the fact that you haven't gotten what you want, and the fact that you're still away from it keeps your desire flowing, and that's what eventually is going to lead to
absolutely. I think there's an element of, I think we're talking about the lost object here. But I think repressions and boundaries can be the most generative. I think that people sometimes have an illusion that art is something that just flows out of you, that it's because artists are in touch with some kind of oneness, or their boundaries are lowered, and therefore they can create some kind of truth that is natural and normal and own outflowing of the universe because they have boundaries that they have rid themselves of repressions. I'm not sure that I agree with that, and I think that repressions can be very generative, and certain structures and techniques and being able to use and master one's own repressions.
Filling the blanks.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, fill in the blanks, but borders can create. You know, do you have a painting if you don't have borders around it? You know,
mm-hmm.
You have to have some kind of limits around which to orientate yourself.
Like a shaping limit.
Yeah, shaping limit. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The language that they use in this film. I don't know if you noticed it. There's the tendency for a certain type of English person to say the word "sort of."
Like kind of here.
Yeah, and I actually was saying kind of about 100 times. I think I counted myself already saying it. So I'm like, I am one of those people. But they say sort of like that every other word, and it's kind of a hedging one's bets. One can't actually express one's own feelings. It's I just did it then. Stand away from like living into what your actual opinion is.
Sure.
The discussions are sort of.
It's like creating distance between you and your opinion.
You and your opinion, which is not necessarily a good thing. But I don't think that necessarily not doing that is some kind of magical solution either.
Yeah, because I've also met people that, you know, it's not that they don't say sort of or kind of, mm-hmm. but they do seem very. I mean, I was hanging out with this guy the other day that just cuts through the conversation mm-hmm. with these things that he's saying that are sometimes very shameless. Mm-hmm. Sometimes kind of disturbing, mm-hmm. But I don't know. I'm not sure that I would say that he's unrepressed.
Well, this is exactly what I think what we were going to get at early on the podcast. The idea that we think when we aren't obviously repressed in this traditional way of, we can't express our emotions, that we aren't repressed. But there are so many forms that repression can take. We talked about in a previous episode the idea of sex as a phenomenon today, and how boundaries, we are almost more boundaried now in this world that is very sexually quote unquote open. We were talking about the primary boundary of oneself and the other, and needing permission to cross that boundary, and you know, this idea that the protection of the self in the sexual act is now kind of this huge iron wall. So all the repressions have come to the very border of the person. But people use repressions in many ways. I know somebody who has this persona of being very open and honest and at one with themselves and just says it how it is. But it's almost to the extent that it's a persona hiding actually what she probably really thinks, or how depressed she is really. And often we mistake happiness for unhappiness. We talked about that in a previous podcast. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the idea of a purity ring?
Well, yes.
Culture.
Well, this is something you'd know a lot more about than me, but yeah, I mean, this is a really fascinating concept.
I had one.
You what?
Yeah.
Were you one of these no sex before marriage people?
Sorry?
Were you like one of these no sex before marriage people?
Well, you know, I'm not sure that I had that idea and I really had it close to my heart, but it was definitely something that was part of the community.
So all the women go hot for it? For Adrian, who is not on the market.
No, but it was like...
You can't touch this.
No, I mean, these are kind of like the beliefs that are delegated to you from your parents. Yeah. And I mean, this happens a lot, that your parents believe certain things that maybe they don't even completely like take responsibility for them, but they want the kids to like approve them or to prove the validity of the belief.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think that it's pretty clear now that if you want to have a really wild time, you should get a purity ring.
Well, yes, this is something that's been talked about by Pete quite a lot.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's that which, well, you only want what you can't have. And apparently, I really don't know the actual statistics, but millennials are the most chaste generation. You know, sex is so ubiquitous that nobody's actually having it in real life.
Except for the fundamentalists and
people who wait until they're married. There's something profoundly unsexy about things that are in the public realm related to sex. Sex is all about, you know, you look at someone like Dieter Von Teese, it's all about the hiding the covering over
Yeah.
that is attractive, rather than the, you have a woman dressed in some nice outfit versus just seeing pure genitals. I don't think it's attractive at all.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. The idea, and Zizek's talked about this a lot, of the hippie parent.
Yeah.
The hippie parent almost being worse than the conservative parent.
Oh, the postmodern dad. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do know some hippie parents that talk to their children so openly about sex that I just cannot imagine those children will ever enjoy sex ever again.
Yeah. If you're seeing everything,
Mm-hmm.
desire doesn't flow, because you're not embedding your fantasies into what you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, I mean, what you're talking about right now, I think it's like a burlesque kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're watching a burlesque show, the reason why it's arousing probably is because you're filling in the blanks for something that you're not seeing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're seeing a completely naked body,
Mm-hmm.
There's really no room for you. You're not participating with like your fantasy is not involved.
You sound like Roland Barthes right now when he's talking about the pleasure of the text. Yeah.
No, but I mean,
agree with you. Yeah.
I mean, Zizek talks about this where it's like you can have a couple having sex, but really they're masturbating, because you're having sex with the other person, but at the same time you need this overarching fantasy that is composed by certain memories that you have of the person that you're probably having sex with, which is a certain moment, like a certain smile that turned you on at some point, or a body part that you really like, or I don't know, but you're filling in the blank.
I think most people have sex with their eyes closed, which probably says something. And they're projecting in their mind,
or with
fantasy.
the lights off.
The lights off. Yeah. It's interesting. This idea that Freud, I think we've said this already, is a man that is obsessed with sex and that sees sex everywhere. But the irony is that actually in a Freudian reading, humans can't have sex.
Yeah.
When it's purely biological, we're not turned on. There's something supplementary to sex that comes in fantasy. And fantasy is things that aren't real and aren't really there.
Yeah.
We were at this modern art thing the other day. It was in a hotel, and they had various exhibitions in various rooms in the hotel. And one room was just photographs of large older women.
Yeah, quote unquote, not porno.
It's not that kind of exposure. It's not sexy. I mean, not so,
Yeah.
There's potentially a whole other.
There's actually, I mean, we could probably leave this for the next episode, but there's a great example of that in Blade Runner.
Yes.
Which I won't talk about because
I wonder what it is. You're leaving me hanging. Are we going to talk about Blade Runner 2049 next time?
Yeah, I think we should do that.
Absolutely. So basically, what is the parting message of this podcast in relation to the idea of repression and Archipelago? What would you say?
Well, I think that there's a certain hunger to want to rid oneself of their repressions, and I don't necessarily think that that's the way to go. I think that people get a lot out of the repression. Sometimes, obviously, there's toxic repressions that you need to get over, but I don't think that it's necessarily something that you should repeat over and over again, like trying to like overcome your repressions. Like you definitely do. I mean, you get life out of, like, your life comes out of a lot of repression.
It's the primary nerve, the nerve of the father. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the very structure of Archipelago, this kind of returning to the start, people arriving, people leaving, nothing changes and everything's fine. Also, the idea that just over the horizon of repression is some utopian world where one will be at one with oneself.
Yeah, I mean, it's not
just won't.
Would you say that it's like nothing happens, or it's just like life happens?
With the film,
yeah.
Life happens.
Which coincidentally, it's also it's aesthetic, just life. Like what we were saying, just like a fly in the wall. Just I kind of did feel like, oh my god, this is just like watching paint dry.
There's a guy in the UK who actually made an 11-hour film of paint drying just to annoy the ratings agency, because they have to watch every second of every film that's made. So he just.
You've had a couple of ideas also that maybe we might do in some future.
of paint drying.
No, not paint drying, but like, well, I won't say.
Oh, well, yeah, I see what you mean, yeah. But the idea that, I think we talked about this quotation last time, scratch an aromatherapist and you'll find a fascist. The idea that, so we can turn the idea of repression into a scapegoat mechanism. So having an ideological totalizing view that, as long as we overcome X, which in some parts of history has been a certain racial group or whatever, repression, everything will be sorted out. It will be at one with the universe. We'll return to this non-existent womb-like state. When we inspire the desire of our primary caregivers, it just doesn't exist. So we have to kind of enjoy our repressions and use our repressions and make the most of our repressions. Because they're very generative.
I think we're going to be coming back to this theme a lot during the length of the podcast, but it's this investment from the idea that something can fulfill you in a way that is
transcendent.
Transcendent. And that was the whole thing of 68, that anti-repression and trying to get to the bottom of like what's going on in what you don't want to see, something that maybe doesn't work. The spirit works now, but it's the rules of the game are different. And I think this is one of the big things, and it's like
absolutely.
Accepting the repressions that we have.
I think we can really see in our contemporary system, in advertising, in the corporate world, in industry, the idea of not being repressed has been taken on by the, not even system, but the libidinal structure that exists. So the idea, you see television, characters often of, or you even see these public figures where I own my anxiety, I'm completely honest, I own my anxieties, or I am a woman who is an asshole, hear me roar, as if like just by admitting one's repressions, one overcomes it, or kind of, but the texture is just the same. I'm not making that much sense, but we'll get into all these things.
No, I think it was pretty good. I like that.
Across these podcasts. Anyway, we should probably end it there because we are going for dinner.
All right.
Okay.
See you guys
next time.
Bye.